Hello and welcome to our ongoing series of conversations with people who are making a difference with how it is that we live our digital lives. Very fortunate today to connect with two excellent experts from Extreme Networks to discuss the role of the intelligent enterprise networking environment as we return to a smart and healthy workplace. With us today is Mike Leibowitz. He's the head of Americas in the Office of the CTO at Extreme Networks. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. Super excited about this conversation.
Excellent, as are we. Also with us today is Jim Hackey, who is in charge of key business relationships with commercial organizations in the Illinois and Indiana regions for Extreme Networks. Jim, thank you for taking the time to join us for this very important conversation.
Yeah, you bet, Lane. It's great to be here as well. The topic of building operational performance is key to my heart. So really excited to go.
Outstanding. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Mike, let me start with you. A lot of movement going on as we begin to think about the future. The rush to support the shelter-in-place workforce was done extremely quickly. IT organizations deserve a lot of credit for doing that on the fly and doing it so successfully. As we look ahead, however, and we begin to examine what return to work strategies in 2021 and beyond, what are your views on what these strategies will look like, and what do you think is driving the need and desire to redefine what it is to work in our physical workplaces?
Yeah, it's a great question, and right at the top, and people use the word new normal and all these kind of buzz catchy words, but the situation itself is still evolving. Right, we're not quite through the situation. Right at the very top, we certainly hope everybody is staying safe and safety first, before we even start to consider bringing our employees or our customers back into environments. Safety is at the forefront. Beyond that, specific strategies and technologies, and that's really the heart of the conversation today. But we've been doing a lot of work specifically with our customers in a variety of verticals, helping them realize the new types of strategies that they may want to take or focus upon in order to build a safer environment or be able to re-enter that environment in a more safe way. You can see on this slide just, at a very top or high level, 4 specific areas, and we'll touch on them in a little more detail, but being able to facilitate more agile work environments. So everybody or many people have been working from home. We think a lot about, how the employees are functioning at their home or wherever they may be. Smaller branch scenarios, more remote sites, really the branch of one is becoming more of a reality. Different types of automation systems, IoT, to help us, and we'll touch on that as well. Contact tracing, many environments, and sometimes legislated either at a state or at a federal level, where some forms of contact or proximity tracing, and then occupancy management to really understand how many individuals are in a given area, whether for cleaning purposes after the fact, or to really understand how hot or how filled a specific area is. Again, if you're under a mandate, local government or federal government, which is ever changing, you need these systems in place to address and handle.
So Jim, I wanted to come to you. You spend your days every day talking to customers. Are you seeing this conversation unfold? Are you finding people are talking and thinking about what their options are and the role of the network and moving to the next generation of what it's going to be like to go to the work?
You bet, Lane. The conversations I'm having with my customers is timing, right? They're visualizing the workspace, seeing contact and contact tracing with everything from doors to devices, with safety and security always being priority one for a building or your home, right? But the network is elevating both more and more devices on the network and the need for intelligence about those devices where they are to actually keep the workplace safe. So yeah, it's a big topic for us.
Mike, I wanted to do a deep dive because we've been talking about things like the Agile Workplace for a while, but it does seem that it's taken on an entirely new level of urgency in this sort of COVID and post-COVID, the so-called new normal, as you mentioned it, as we go forward. Tell me a little bit about what strategies are sort of advancing the ability to be more agile, even as we were on an aggressive conversation about this topic before.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we'll definitely see unfold, and it will be over the next couple of years, is that return to work, return to environments will never be back at full capacity. Almost every organization is considering or looking at optimizing environments for remote users, even those that never had remote users before. Working from their home full time, and so when we really think about the agility of this solution, it's not so much that the employees, mentally are prepared to go work somewhere else. It's that your IT infrastructure, everything that you've thought about previously, if all of your employees were in one building, it's far easier to manage and secure those users and their data. Now with everybody moving around, and they will be coming in and out, right? I don't think any environment's going to go back to, or unlikely, go back to 100% capacity. Very unlikely that it'll remain at zero capacity. So you'll be somewhere in the middle for perhaps the forever. And so when we think about securing, when we think about building networks, when we think about connectivity and data, we now have to consider the expansion of those users permanently beyond the walls of your environment.
So clearly very interesting implications from a network architecture perspective, as this slide shows, the need to support connected home environments that are consumer grade all the way through to really accessing data centers. But there's also a cultural dynamic, right, Jim? I mean, this is changing the way people manage their businesses. Are you having conversations with people about what it's like to manage, lead, and accomplish organizational objectives in this hybrid, constantly changing dynamic workplace?
Oh yeah, I certainly am. Back in the early 2000s, video conferencing was being sold as reducing travel expense and reducing travel and things like that, but also disconnecting the human experience that you build trust with by being in the same room. But with today's pandemic, it's changed every employee's work schedule. Unless you're a frontline worker or essential worker, which there are obviously, and thank goodness for them, the network is becoming the office, and also needing security and safety. So from my wife, a school teacher, teaching at home for the first time ever, to having to deliver our value to our customers, we need to keep, her kids safe as well as corporate data safe. So yeah, the working from anywhere is becoming very critical.
Sorry, Lane, I'll just add one interesting perspective, and it hit me yesterday, actually speaking to a customer, new job titles. And we'll talk about resources a little bit later on, but there are even forming new job titles, branch officers, remote user officers. There's a whole new category of jobs that are being created out of this in the IT organization, not just the cloud architect or the data architect. There's actually branch and remote user job titles that are forming out of it. So just thinking about culturally, and where Jim was saying, the world has changed, and even people will be hired into different roles to manage that agile work environment. It's very interesting.
Well, it raises very fascinating issues about skill sets and competencies that need to be developed. But it also introduces the role of emerging technologies. It's very difficult today not to think about our current and immediate future, or the current state and our immediate future, without thinking about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and Internet of Things and other technologies that act as a force multiplier. Tell me a little bit about how you see these emerging technologies, Mike, sort of fit into enhancing this much more complex environment, both at the endpoint and at the infrastructure level.
Yeah, I mean, without technology, when you think about, even on this slide, we talk about IoT as an example, building systems and cameras and thermal sensors taking temperature. The option that you have, if you're not leveraging technology to do these tasks, is to put human beings in front of it. And that gets very costly. And we have examples, and Jim could probably bring some examples too, but if you have individuals that are sitting, taking temperature and tracking, everything manually, then the question becomes, what sort of workflows do you have? How do you try to do this contact tracing? It becomes very, very costly to do it with humans, right? And you're bringing people in that were doing different things for your organization. So one of the key and critical parts to think about is with IoT, it's not just for the sake of I'm putting sensors in. It's to do things safer, faster, more expeditiously, to be able to get data and analytics out of it, and also not to have the human factor of requiring people sitting, perhaps at the front of a building, droves of people sitting at the front of the building, taking temperature and tracking people down. So really, really critical when you think about automation and IoT, how it helps and brings the safety, the element of safety back into the environments.
No, and it also, you talked about shifting roles leading up to this discussion about technology and the skills and competencies that introduces just to manage the organization. Jim, are you finding that people are evaluating their skill set from a technical perspective as people introduce these emerging technologies, often bridging internet technologies or traditional IT technologies with operational technologies? Are you seeing the organizations respond with the right people, the right talent, and the right leadership that recognizes the nuances of this pretty significant evolution and how technology is contributing to the enterprise?
Yeah, I certainly am. And a little while ago, this was actually being addressed by one of the innovative customers of mine, a Redmond-based Washington company called Microsoft. But that was actually years ago, and they helped design, we were helping them design their new headquarter campus. And I mean, the innovation that they were tying together to make a healthier, more productive workplace was driven by technology, while always looking to the safety and security of the occupants themselves, right? So they were utilizing sensors for occupancy, but also as access to emergency devices. So this allows them to report back, kind of like what Mike was saying, report back to the city inspectors that indeed the fire extinguisher was not blocked for more than a minute, saving time and money for both entities to report upon the fact that their workplace is safe. But then also, in reality, that city would not have to have a person walking the campus. They would be getting that report. So it is definitely something that you look at how roles are evolving and changing. Property management is huge at the moment right now.
Yeah. What's interesting about that, Mike, is how these technologies are democratized now, and mainstream perhaps is a better word. As Jim points out, this was sort of front leading edge work 10 years ago with companies like Microsoft or other big Silicon Valley players that can play this game. But it sounds like you're describing these IoT, AI, robotics, automation. Those are ready for prime time and ready for mass deployment. Am I interpreting your comments correctly?
You are, and actually democratization or democratize is definitely the right word, meaning it's becoming more available, easier to use, easier to deploy. That's not to be confused with the word commodity. That's not at all the conversation or the consideration here, but you're absolutely right. Becoming more mainstream, and in mainstream, it really does mean that it's more consumable, it's easier to deploy, you can get the value out of these systems, IoT sensors, AI, much quicker. So your time to value or your return on that investment is far more rapid than it would have been previous, a number of years ago, where you probably were into more of a science project, trying to build it yourself and figure it out yourself. There's very well established and mature systems on market today.
Well, let's move on, and let me stay with you, Mike, and talk about some really specific cases and points that are particularly relevant today, especially as we plan to sort of live with the uncertain consequences of a pandemic that we're still wrestling to understand. Tracking this contact tracing topic is top of mind, not only with enterprises but with the public at large. Tell me a little bit about how you see that evolving and the role of enterprise networks and facilitating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really an interesting, conversation point. And what I would implore, specifically when I speak with customers or advising, is where do you play in the stack? Where are you starting and stopping in terms of some form of proximity? Some people like using the term contact tracing. More importantly is why are you doing it, right? So, and it sounds kind of silly, but are you doing it to comply with a mandate? We need to know how many people have been in the building, and we need to have their information to contact them after the fact? Are we doing it for our own purposes? And then at what level, right? Are we trying to do it for just my organization, people entering my building or my facility, for a campus, something bigger, or for a full community? And where do you fit in that stack? More importantly, in the conversation, I always try to drive towards is the workflow. So perhaps less about the technology, because your network plays a key role. Absolutely. The mobile devices that are coming through is one form, one type of system that you can build to provide proximity tracing. Then the questions come into, what are you going to do with information? How are individuals going to report back into you? So if you're not a state and local government or a federal government agency or a healthcare organization, how are you handling that information? How are you addressing, if somebody calls in and says that I have tested positive, how do you handle their information? Now you're talking about, patient privacy. Mm-hmm. How do you actually relay that to groups of individuals? And so there's a lot of workflow that needs to be considered, but fundamentally, without a network in place to, harvest this data, this information, you don't even have the starting point for it.
It's another interesting leadership implications, right? If you're in an organization, your job is to perform a value to a market that generates revenue, and business is business, and what happens outside of the business is meant to be, your own private business. This sort of bridges that gap a little bit, right, Jim? We're concerned about the health of our employees, and how is that conversation playing out? What level of comfort are you seeing with your client conversations about leveraging technology to not just get a job done to generate value, but also to maintain the health of their workforce in the building and outside?
Yeah, I'll kind of jump back to the Microsoft example. They did that as well. They used technology for the safety and security, but they were also really making sure that there was water in the break rooms that had lemons and fruit in it, because it helped them fight the cold bug, right? So again, they were very forward thinking about how to make sure the workplace is a secure one, obviously, but a safer one as well from the unseen is, in this pandemic time. But what I'm also hearing from my customers is that intelligence is in the data. So customer of mine is using, cloud-based intelligence for their law firm to deliver tools and answers for their cases that they're having, as well as, using our technology as the control plane to elevate the workplace, wherever it might be, at home, in a building across the world. So it definitely does change how people are looking at technology, and how a certain box manufacturer that's a customer of mine as well, they're evolving their manufacturing workplace where they have to have machine-to-machine communications. And in order to do that, they had to actually evolve into that. So how do we do it today? How do we manually do it today? And how will this network help us? How will it help us plan, build more, be more agile for their customers? So, that's really the role on this one.
Very interesting. Mike, it occurs to me from that first strategy slide, as we talked about the Agile network and the need to connect to people at home. That feeds into this a little bit, right? And we know when people are at home, and we know what their behaviors are, and the ability to there is the network remains a constant from a contact tracing perspective as people leave their home networks, get onto their mobile phones, go into the enterprise environment. Is the intelligence to sort of monitor that in a tasteful way, non-creepy, non-privacy invading way? Does that feed into that intelligence and insight that Jim was just talking about?
Absolutely. And if you consider any type of analytics, there's always macro level and then kind of micro level, and how deep are you going to go? But if you think about it, even from a macro level, how many of my employees are coming into the office, this week versus last week versus this month, compared to last month? If something's happening, perhaps a specific city or a specific area, things are getting hotter in terms of people getting ill. Maybe you want to understand that now these individuals or this particular site, I'm going to recommend that everybody stays home. So you can start forming proactive strategies that just based on what you're seeing, perhaps, from the analytics that are coming out. So, hey, next week, you know what, everybody just stay home, right? We're just going to play it safe for the next week or two. You don't have to wait for the government or some sort of legislature to change, how to function in your community. You can do that from some of this information. And so absolutely, privacy is at the forefront, right? And being able to use these types of technologies either anonymously, or if they're your own employees, you'll know who, what, where, when, and why they've entered environments, and you can make better decisions and keep people safer.
Outstanding. Well, let's talk a little bit about occupancy management. I think that's the big, if there is a return to work, making sure that we're not too crowded and that we're managing things correctly on that front seems to loom large. Mike, let me stick with you on this one and tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are, and especially from a network imperative perspective.
Yeah, and it's a logical follow-on from the contact or proximity tracing technologies that you would employ is, the management of occupancy. And again, things are evolving, right? So some cities, some countries may change, and that's actually happened recently where I live, where the numbers change, how many people are allowed in versus how many people are not. So maybe 10 people are allowed in this environment, and next week 50. Well, if that's the case, how do you track that? How do you actually know that you're adhering? Again, specifically if there's a government, state, local, or federal, that's being impacted or implied onto your business, how do you actually adapt to that? And so the agility we talked about is not just having network agility to move users, employees, guests, customers in and out of environments, but also leveraging the network or harnessing the network to build technologies on top of it that allow you to actually manage the occupancy. Finally, when you think about occupancy management, keeping things safe also is around the cleaning, right? How clean is your environment? Well, if people haven't used part of your facility, whether it's, boardrooms or meeting rooms or anywhere in your building, if they haven't been used, well, it doesn't make sense to spend the money to have them cleaned every hour, every 30 minutes, whatever you may be mandated. So now these types of systems can tell you the occupancy is at the correct level. We're not overloaded at a particular day or time. And if we're going to clean environments, we know that we're doing them at the right places at the right time based on how many people have been there.
Very interesting. Well, let's dive into what the specific role or what the specific requirements need to be in place. For a long time, the network has been seen as the plumbing of an organization, totally critical, but not necessarily strategic, right? It's vital, like a utility, to keep the lights on and to keep boxes lit and functioning. But it seems like that's beginning to change, and it seems like the network really does play a foundational difference in how it is that we will have a safe return to some kind of new normal. And Jim, I guess I wanted to ask you the question first. Is there that recognition? As you talk to executives, are you still only talking to network administrators and managers and leaders, or do you find the conversation expanding to other business leaders and other levels of executive management among the customers that you're talking to?
That's an awesome point, because I am talking with CIOs, CTOs, of course, as well as a lot of times is the COO, because that network is becoming like electricity. It's powering the access card swipe. It's powering the lights. It's powering the shades of these buildings. And just like Mike said about a conference room being reserved, it might be reserved in a calendar, but if there's a system, an overarching system that says, well, it was reserved, but nobody showed up, then you don't have to clean it. But then also during the day, if someone doesn't show up in that first 10 minutes, they can actually make that room available once these employees come back to the workspace, and allows them to reserve it. So it's really just space utilization, because people will be leasing fewer floors because they'll have fewer employees coming in. I actually had a customer of mine that was a manufacturer. They're looking at 35 floors, and this was a couple of years ago again. They reimagined the workspace, and they only had to lease 26, and they still had an increase of employees coming to that building. So, yes, I am talking to COOs, CFOs, because we also offer some financing as well for our technology that allows them to, pay by the drink as opposed to, buying the whole water cooler. So, the conversations do reach into the business, not just saying how fast is it, how many ports do you have. It is truly, how can you help me use the network utility as a way to drive revenue, reduce costs, get a faster time to market, and then really most importantly is a better customer experience for my customer's customer.
And Mike, it's just fascinating how the network has become a repository of intelligence, which you suggested a couple of times already in this conversation. But when we talk about network optimization, it's often about how much faster can we get bits to flow through the pipe. But here, and Mike's pointing out that the network is playing a critical role in facility optimization, that you can reduce the number of floors that you're using and have even more employees that work safely and securely and separately from each other on a smaller physical footprint. What are the networking components that allow you to not just have a powerful network, but an intelligent one as well, especially as we talk about this reentry process?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'll come back to your question, but what's definitely interesting, and we saw this years ago with telephony teams forming and joining in IT, you start to see that shift harder now with facilities also joining or participating with IT, because these things are critical, and the network's never been more critical than right now, right? And we see that in real time. Every organization is absolutely realizing that in order to have a network that can carry you forward, I mean, you're really talking about modernized network architectures and modernized network infrastructures. So not just the hardware that's going in, and certainly you want high performance, latest, greatest hardware, whether it's switches, routers, access points. There's great stuff out there that you can look for. But the management tools, certainly as we shift more towards the cloud, management tools, analytic tools that live in the cloud that make it far easier to instrument your network, that is to get it up and running if you're shifting out into a more agile network environment. And then, of course, be able to extract the data, leverage the data, and be able to, whether it's through your own tools or APIs, use business intelligence coming out of that on top. So again, the hardware is always, kind of the key, sort of, as you said, the plumbing, but then the software layers that build on top of it is really, really what you want to be looking for, and how quick and easy it is for your team, fewer resources and fewer training to get up and running and then manage that environment long term.
Simplification is not really the correct word, right? It's managing complexity. I look at this slide and I see all of the variables here that need to be managed. You're right. It's all about making things more intuitive, which typically means making things more intelligent, and which tells me a little bit about the role of the network in enhancing visibility, right? As this slide points out, you can't manage what you don't see. How is the network playing a role in enhancing that a situational awareness, as they say in the military, to really understand where things are?
It's really such an interesting concept, because visibility, and I think many, they think about visibility as a troubleshooting, right? Oh, something's broken, I got to fix it. Someone's calling in to complain. But visibility is a full loop, a full process, a full cycle from the time that a user or device is accessing or being authenticated, authorized onto the network, all the way through the session with which they're living on the network, and then certainly as they exit the network. So being able to extract the data from those sessions that have been on the network and then do something meaningful. And so oftentimes, again, people think about visibility as a tool for troubleshooting. And I think Jim was touching on it a little bit, that, or was diving into it, that, the network and the data that could be extracted is far more powerful than perhaps some realize, in terms of driving new sources of revenue, being able to implement or augment, excellent user experiences, and being able to provide higher levels of security or operational efficiencies. And so all of those elements, and ultimately why someone would invest in a new network or upgrade their network to get that sort of return, all of that requires some fundamental visibility tool set. Another way to say it would be analytics on top of all of these things happening across this infinitely distributed world and infinitely distributed enterprise that we're living in now.
Jim, it strikes me as we listen to this, and there is that transition, right, from this plumbing metaphor to the network as your analytical platform, right? We still have discussions about data lakes and data mining and taking things out of their native environment. Well, they're in their native environment as data is going from one place to another. And I guess isn't it a fact, sir, a leading question, that the network becomes the platform that allows you to balance all of these things? We know everything about people, we understand processes, and we understand what technologies are being touched because the network is the one item that touches all of this. Is that a recognition that your customers are coming to? Do you see that fabric model for networking being seen as a management tool, not just a utility tool?
That is 100% correct, because back on what Mike had pointed out about the visibility of even into an end device that company doesn't own. So what that allows us using our control plane platform is, the people monitoring and managing the network, they're not going to waste time looking for an issue, but actually fixing or explaining a reason why a BYOD device is not working as well as it should, because that device came in, 4 months ago, because what we allow is our customers to have unlimited historical data of their network. So they're not wasting time trying to fix a problem they already fixed, and they can let that person know a way to fix it on even their end device, or at least let them know you're not having the fastest access because of what happened 4 months ago. So it is a big topic of the conversation for us.
Fascinating. Anything to add to that, Mike? I mean, it just seems like everything on this slide is correct. There are more locations. There are more applications. Users of different sites, or you can't really distinguish employees anymore. You have contractors. You have partners. Sometimes the distinctions are difficult to understand. From a network access perspective, it does seem like it's important to understand roles, responsibilities, and ensure that in this very connected environment that things are also secured, as we have at the base of this slide. What can you tell us about the security aspect, the risk management aspect of the network in supporting this complexity?
Yeah, I mean, I love the graphic, and I certainly hope anyone that's listening or looking at it doesn't feel that much pressure on their day-to-day life. But things that there's just more, right? More of everything, and as more comes in, you start to weigh functionality against security, right? And it's hard to provide both, right? In a perfectly secure environment, nothing's functional. You lock everything down, and no device and no user can access anything on the network. It's perfectly secure, 100% secure, but it's not functional. And so finding that balance, and this poor guy is not actually balancing much. He's just getting crushed. But finding that balance between how much security you require, and you think about all these users, employees that are at home, they're going to come back at some point. It starts to expand the envelope, if you will, in terms of the attack surface. Devices that never left your organization that are going to come back. How do you address that? What are the sorts of tools to now identify those devices or segment those devices on the network perhaps differently than you did before? Again, you need an agile network that you can start employing or deploying these types of strategies in real time to keep your business functional.
Well, the data appears to be on your side across the board. From a security standpoint, what a world that we live in. The attack surface evolving, the threat environment really shifting. Tell me, Mike, a little bit about how you find people responding to that pressure, and especially in a resource, and by that I mean financially constrained environment.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about this time that we're living in is, and certainly, and I say it respectfully, there's a lot of businesses that are feeling the pressure, and some that can't make changes fast enough to stay in business. Many organizations, if they weren't in the process of digital transformation and in certain verticals, are being forced to digitally transform their organization. And you can see it on the slide, the statistic. More and more execs would say that they have a transformation strategy and that they're going to invest, but they're not in a position from a resource perspective to actually execute on that. And so there's really this great challenge out there. And people would have said it a number of years ago, if you're not transforming, then you're going out of business. And there was all sorts of stuff about digital transformation, perhaps for the last decade. Well, here's the time where either you've invested ahead of time and you're in a good position, or you're being forced in real time. You must transform or you're not going to be in business. And you can think about retailers and education and, live environment, live event environments that are all transforming at the same time. And so it's a very fascinating world that we're living in, and certainly from an IT perspective, but some kind of critical thinking about how to get there from here to there in short order.
Jim, that 15% of the surveys, of those surveyed in that, I believe it's that Forrester study, only 15% think they have the skills and capability to execute their business transformation initiative. McKinsey says that 70% of business transformation initiatives fail, but that jumps out at me. From a leadership standpoint, where are people finding that skills? If they don't have it in-house, how can they lean on external resources to bridge that talent gap?
Yeah, exactly. And again, kind of back to the previous part of this session was, who do I talk to? COOs, CIOs. I talk to HR as well. So when you're looking at the fact that, you've got 15% that have an idea of what they want to do. And again, obviously working for a network company, I understand that the network will help deliver those services for them, but it's not necessarily just a network background. It's really just the business background and how the network can help it and affect a lot of the buying decisions that my customers are having. So we actually have a Extreme University that has online classes that allow us to help them deliver this kind of vision, as well as, see what kind of tools they can get from an Extreme Networks. And we have partners that, we work with that work on our open platform to allow us to talk about the network and that device over there that we have nothing to do with except for maybe powering, controlling it, getting machine learning and artificial intelligence from it just because it's on the network. So yeah, it's a conversation that you have to have, not on the tech side, but more of what do you do and how can we do it better in this new already accelerated IT world, but now it's the acceleration of business overall, and again, to stay alive as well as thrive.
Very interesting. All of this, of course, we talk about the complexity and the role of intelligence in helping to manage that complexity. Very quickly, Mike, give us a sense of how emerging technologies can sort of help bring this together. It seems very fragmented. It seems daunting. How can we bring it all together?
Yeah, it is, and I certainly won't jump into every single thing on this particular slide. I would probably flip the script a little bit away from the technology, and one of my recommendations, and certainly when I speak with C-levels at any of our customers or prospects, is trying to really focus on your business driver, your business strategy, and then figuring out what technologies take you there. We've talked about it, a few times here, of how the network is so critical, and that absolutely is the case. It'll be the case in almost any business strategy that is attaching to technology. And so we always would recommend being in tune with what emerging technologies are out there. Which ones can you leverage or harness to get to your business goal in a more timely, in a faster manner than you perhaps would have been able to otherwise. And so, again, there's a lot of stuff up here between IoT and wireless, and cybersecurity, and consumption and cloud. All of these things do require a level of attention and people in your organization thinking about these things on a day-to-day basis.
But it strikes me that this is what brings it all together, right? All of that complexity can sort of lead you towards fragmentation. Like if you have a mobile first strategy or a cloud, how many firsts can you have, right? At some point, you need to have a business strategy and your technology support that. And it seems like the data is where that lands. Jim, is there a sense that the data and the network, because that's what networks carry, that the data becomes your tabula rasa, the blank slate that allows you to analyze and begin to make sense of this whole entire, I don't want to call it a mess, but a lot of spaghetti of complexity?
I've used that before, where you've got the spaghetti and you got some meatballs in there. So no, I agree. It's the previous slide with all the different icons and things like that. You really can't make a decision on one or two or three of those. You have to look at the business. And after you get this data, you need to know how and why I need it. There's people that won't benefit from it, that are doing a specific thing, and they would only have to look at two or three of those icons and say, that's what I need. That's really going to help me drive my business. But when you get into the enterprise space that have global presence, as well as multiple business outcomes, as well as business delivery to their customers, they really need to look at all the ways to help learn from how they're pleasing their customer and then drive better outcomes for them. So, 100% correct.
I don't know if you have anything to add to this, but I definitely wanted to talk about the role of the cloud, Mike, in terms of managing that data question, because that can be another source of fragmentation, right? There isn't a cloud. Most people are managing multiple environments. Tell me a little bit about why we should be looking at this as an important resource.
No, you're right. And the previous slide, as Jim was speaking to it, data is everything and is, the new gold, if you will. Cloud is what allows you to bring that together. So if you say it a different way, having your data on different islands in different data centers or on premise, and you can't extract that, and you can't work with third-party systems, and you can't interconnect with APIs. Your data will be at rest forever, right? And so you want to be able to put your data in motion and get value out of it. Cloud gives you all the things that you see here: simplicity and speed and scale, security, right? Sometimes people jump into this, cloud isn't secure. Well, cloud's very proven and it's very secure. The largest organizations in the world, let alone the hyperscalers that are there, the Amazons, Microsofts, Googles, they've invested millions and billions of dollars into securing their infrastructure. Very, very secure. Without cloud, you don't have the speed and agility to harvest this information, to leverage the data that's out there. And ultimately, the very bottom corner of the slide would talk about, cost savings. And that can be relative in two terms. One, in terms of how much you're actually spending, right, to use your technologies or enable your technologies, but then also time. And time is money, right? And if you cannot extract, again, going on the data example, if you can't extract information, you can think about location information or marketing information, all of these things that drive experiences for individuals. That time can be money, and your competitor can be moving at a faster pace and offering things that you cannot. And so this is where cloud becomes just so critical in today's environment. It's a must. It's mandatory.
Very well. So we talked about the skills and roles and the ability, the need to begin to expand and integrate those capabilities, those competencies. But let's push to what you're actually recommending to your clients. And Jim, let me start with you and sort of get at a high level. How are you engaging, and how is it different in terms of the consultative aspect of bringing network resources to bear to the enterprise in general, but to this return to work safely problem statement in particular?
Certainly. The return to work has its own, things that they have to worry about, contact and contact tracing, like I mentioned earlier. But when it comes to making sure wherever people are working, is the fact that you need to have that data to make sure that you are reacting to the industry you're trying to serve as well. So the past decade has seen so many startup companies come in and just make sure that they take over entire industries almost, and that make you pivot as opposed to you driving that car. And that's, of course, the Uber example that everybody uses, right? But if you're making those changes and consulting with, obviously not just a one person that's trying to sell you everything in their bag because they have server storage, networking, and security, and that might make it seem easy, but are they truly coming in with solutions that get outside of their comfort zone? Because I love getting outside of my comfort zone and talking with a CFO about why that 48 port fiber switch is really the best decision, and not getting into the technology of 100 gigabit or whatever. It's really just what it's bringing to him or her, to their customers, to make them more successful.
Mike, let me give you the last word on recommendations, final thoughts, where we take the conversation from here.
Yeah, no, we've talked about a lot of different concepts, and it's been a great conversation. Definitely appreciate, Jim on my side, but also yourself, Lane. This really does summarize a lot of it. The key kind of takeaway. What are the things that we would recommend, that we talk about with our customers? Master emerging technologies, being focused on, again, the business strategy that you have in front of you and which technology is available to build into and ultimately achieve that outcome. Real-time data, we can't speak enough about the value of real-time data. And data to us is both data and cloud. We kind of bring those things together in a very, very meaningful way. And then ensuring that you have the right skills to execute. You can have the best plans, right? And some would say there's famous quotes, right? Execution eats strategy for breakfast. All those, Peter Drucker and a whole bunch of really smart people that have written books on it. But without the skills, you can't execute, and without execution, the considerations that you have around your strategies just don't get fulfilled. And so we really believe in technologies that are simple, intuitive, and consistent. We drive, from an extreme perspective, a very holistic approach to building networks, to abstracting the data, all cloud-based, and we do it in a very effortless manner. And so experience is everything to us. And at the end of the day, these would be our key recommendations for any organization that is working through, or even just starting to work through, how to safely reopen and re-enter employees, guests, customers into your environments.
Outstanding. Okay, what a wonderful discussion. I want to thank you both for providing insights into these trends and these developments that really should be very carefully considered as we explore how it is that we can tailor a return to the emerging workplace of the future in a safe manner. And as was stated by both of you, these are going to be as unique as a fingerprint, right? Every organization, every category of industry probably has their own approach to the critical role that the enterprise networking environment is going to play in accomplishing these successful outcomes. It would be such a shame if this was the end of an interview and not the beginning of a broader conversation. So for this reason, I want to invite our listeners to learn more by visiting Extreme Networks online, and then reach out to my guests here today, to both Jim and Mike. Definitely find resources, not only to learn more about emerging solutions, but I think tremendous amount of insight on the business value that can be harvested from whatever network investments you've made. So with that, I want to thank my guests. I want to thank you, our viewers and our listeners. And I want to take this opportunity to wish you all a terrific rest of your day. Have a safe, productive rest of your week, month, and year.